Welcome back to the second part of all the loop functions that VEX offers. So the next one will be a do loop. So a do loop is a very similar one to a while loop. It actually contains a while loop, but there's a small difference. A do loop will execute the code inside uh, at least once, no matter if the statement or not statement condition is true or not. So in theory, you can see that it creates a kind of a randomize or adds or subtracts the position in the y-axis based on a random number. So I'll go over the code. So here I'm creating a random value from a point number and adding a seed. So this should range from 0 to 1. And what I'm doing here is I'm subtracting from the y position each iteration 0.05. And then I'm adding to this rand value 0.1. And then I'm saying while or iterate until rand isn't or until rand is equal or larger than 1. But what if I rewrite the rand value with 2? Now we know this wrangle shouldn't have any effect if this was a regular while loop. But if I disable it, we can see that it still does something. And the reason is because even though this rand value here or this statement here is untrue, the do loop will still execute at least once this statement here. So in theory, you can think of it. The code goes, and then it comes here. It executes this and also this. And then it checks if the while loop is, or then it checks if the while condition here is true or not. In this case, it calculates that it's not true. So it exits the loop. But we still actually ran over the piece of code here. So that's one of the differences of a do loop. And if I disable this, now it goes over, it executes this code, and then it checks for the conditions inside here. And then it loops over and over and over until this condition is no longer true. So there are a few additional things that loops can do. So here I have another example of a point. As you can see, the point is just being moved in the y-axis. So here I have the number of iterations and the float threshold, which is a float value. So actually, I don't know why do I have a float here as a threshold, because I don't need it actually. So my bad. So this I'll be using a for loop. You should be already familiar with this one. It's here. So I'm creating an integer value y that is set to 0. Then I'm checking if the y is still smaller than the iteration number, and then I'm adding each iteration value of 1 to my y. So don't mind this one here for now. I'll actually set this to, and the things I would like to talk about is 3 different expressions, which are break, continue, and return. So the break is a very similar one to return, but they have a slight difference in what they do. And I'll start with the break. So usually you'll use all these conditions with a if statement inside your loop, but a break condition will essentially break the entire loop. So shut down the entire loop. Continue will essentially, if I set here continue, it will skip this code here, and it will jump over to the next iteration, if that makes sense. So it will execute until here, and then it will jump on the next iteration. So it essentially skips everything that's under that iteration, and then it goes over. And if this is again true, it will again skip on everything that's under the continue code. But it doesn't break the loop. A break will shut down this entire loop. So as soon as this statement here is true, the loop is, or it breaks the loop, and the loop is no longer being iterated. And return also breaks the loop, but it actually shuts down the entire wrangle. So firstly, I'll go over the break. So just to prove to you that the break actually does what it's supposed to do, is that in here, I'm adding each iteration a value of 0.1. to my y position. So what should happen in theory, since I have 250, is that I should have position, if I actually disable this, or if I remove that, we have a position 25. When, you know, let's round it up, it's 25 in the y-axis. That's because each frame we're adding 0.1 and we have overall 250 iterations. If I put this back, we know that there's position of just 10. If I also move the point down, we can see that the point still retains its original position, because what we're saying in the if statement, that if position in the y-axis is larger than 10 or equal, then break this loop. So as soon as this turns out to be true, we're breaking the loop. And we can also see that if we're adding each frame 0.01, and we have so when do we actually get to the position in the y-axis to be 10? In 100 iterations, and we can see that the loop breaks as soon as we get to 100 iterations. Okay, what if I set this to return? Return should act very similarly, but what we can see here is that it still actually sets or breaks the entire loop at 100th iteration, but now we can see that I'm setting up a float value or float attribute a that I'm setting to what? Why is it then set to 0? That's because the return function shuts down the entire VEX code, or the entire code in here. So if I, let's say, create a string attribute, let's say name that equals hello, it is being recognized, or it's trying to be created, but there's no value inside. If I set this to break again, we do get these two values. And that's because the break only shuts down this portion of this code, or just the for loop, and return actually shuts down the entire code here. So the result of this code will be only the computations or the calculations that have been done before the return has been executed. And then continue. Let's do the continue. We can see continue gives us the iteration 249, because we know that this will exit before y gets to 250. If I set this to equal, we're going to get 250. But yeah, I hope that makes sense, and I hope you've learned something new. And keep that in mind. All those functions are very useful and can be used in various different scenarios. So yep, I'll see you again. Bye bye.